When you don't take time to look at it through other people's eyes. Take some time and reflect on what you believe in your soul. Cause that is the key to life. You gotta let the negativity go.
Hello, What the Foxers. This is Amber Ross, one of your co-hosts of What the Fox podcast, just popping in with a quick reminder before today's episode. It is summertime, and this summer, Lindsey and I are doing something a little different. We are bringing back some of the most popular, some of the most well-loved, some of the most influential episodes from previous seasons, and just sharing those with you again for some new insights, some new opportunities, and for the folks who weren't with us at that period of time. So stick around, hang in there. Today's episode is going to be amazing. And we wanted to quickly remind you that we are so very grateful for our sponsor, Therapy Appointment. Therapy Appointment is built for therapists by therapists and is the practical tool for starting, growing, and managing your practice. So check them out. And just thank you so much for being here with us this summer, and we hope you enjoy.
Welcome to What the Fox podcast with your co-hosts Lindsey Fox and Amber Ross. Today we do have Adam Volungis joining us from Assumption College. He is a psychologist who has joined us today to discuss the topic of languishing. Welcome back, Dr. Volungis.
Thanks for having me, Lindsey and Amber.
Of course. Absolutely. So I love that we are covering this topic because it is very timely in the sense that we did just recently have an episode about resiliency and toxic positivity and that sort of thing. And then when we had touched base about languishing, this was sort of a buzzword, so to speak, I think in last year when an article came out. I'm not sure if it was the Adam Grant article with the New York Times or if it was through Corey Keyes. Are you not in your head?
Adam? Well, Corey Keyes coined the term, which I don't know when, a while ago, but Adam Grant's the one that kind of really put it on the spotlight when he published his article in the New York Times.
Okay, so Corey Keyes is a sociologist, and he is who coined, I guess, this as the opposite of flourishing. So symptoms of languishing include burnout, no motivation, and kind of like a sense of numbness. And it's not necessarily a mental illness, but it can be helped with a number of coping techniques that we will discuss today. But I'm wondering if you just sort of want to dive into this and inform us like more about what in the world languishing is and how we have seen it present during this pandemic.
Sure. So it's a term that, admittedly myself, just like as an observer, when I heard people talking about Adam Grant's article, my ears kind of perked up. I'll be completely honest. I actually heard of it, but I didn't really read it until a couple of my clients, as a psychologist, I see clients doing a lot, working with traditional depression, anxiety, and stuff like that over the pandemic. And a couple of my clients even said, you should read this article, like actually take a deeper look into it. And it was very helpful to me to kind of, Grant talks about like, it's good to have words or terms to use so we can kind of communicate in a way that it makes sense to all of us. And, as a psychologist, when I treat clients, you kind of see the depression or the anxiety, most cases. But you see a lot of people that don't necessarily have a mental health disorder, but aren't doing that great either at the same time. And this, one could apply this term to anybody kind of struggling with something. But what brought this article about was about the whole pandemic, the blah feeling that we have. One of the things that sticks out with me from Grant is that technically he argues this isn't like truly being burned out like we typically think of, like in certain professions. You kind of still have the depression, the energy, but you're not necessarily clinically depressed either because you still kind of have that hope. He used the terms like joyless and aimless, even like stagnation and emptiness. The last
like
thing
Groundhog's Day, right? It's like waking up and
I was
every
just
single
thinking
day.
over and over. No, it's an excellent point. It just keeps going and going and going. I made, one mental note related to your point, Lindsey, when I was writing this is that, typically research shows that, and this may sound paradoxical at first, that when we have acute stressors, which is not fun or pleasant, like something really big that happens within a short period of time, most of us over time, can cope with that relatively well, unless you're talking like trauma PTSD. It's the chronicity of stressors over time. So, I kind of was thinking, like, if this pandemic only lasted for, in quotes, I say only 2 or 3 months.
You mean
most
like
of us
how
would
we
be,
were advised?
Yeah, like it was going to be 2 or 3 months, but then it gets dragged out. It's just like, that's where you really start to see the languishing is year after year. Literally, what we're approaching 2 full
Right.
years pretty soon. Like
Well,
when
think
we,
about our stress response and how our cortisol operates. Like it was never, the human condition was never designed to be in this constant state of stress for year over year
Mhm,
over year like this.
mhm. Yeah.
When like with no end in sight, right? Like we all at this point have major trust issues because in the beginning they're like, okay, 2, 3 months, we lock it down, stay home,
Trust
stay away
issues
from.
with everyone, Amber, or the government?
Yes, all of the above.
Oh, separate topic.
Yes to
To be
that,
continued.
all of it. No, but like we have these trust issues because it's now you just don't know. Is it going to end? What is the end of this pandemic living going to look like? Like, what does normal even mean anymore? And it's that constant, those thoughts are spinning in my head like at least 10 hours a day. Like, did I grab my mask? Do my kids have hand sanitizer? Did somebody over there just cough? Like, constantly this subconscious worry or stress or like fight or flight is 100% always activated. So, Adam, when the three of us started talking about this, I was like, oh, this makes so much sense. Like,
Mhm,
yes, I am fine, but no, I'm not fine. Like
mhm.
all day long, I'm just waiting for that other shoe to drop on like, what's the next thing that's going to turn my life upside down?
Right. Another person described this as like the indicator is more of the absence of peak mental health rather than it
Mm,
being like a series of like signs, like a list of signs and symptoms, so to speak, that would be in the DSM, which is what we use for like a clinical diagnosis. So languishing is not a condition where it's a mental health condition that you're going to get diagnosed with. Do you mind kind of commenting on that a little bit, Adam, with regard to like languishing as like either an emotional state or is it like a short-term condition? Um,
I'm still learning this myself. I feel like it's I don't think it's a short-term condition, because I think for a lot of us we've had it for quite a while. Maybe
I was
it's
like,
it's
define
a long,
short term.
yeah, maybe a
yeah. Well,
long-term
maybe not
emotional
permanent
state.
lifetime.
Yeah, it depends how you want to define that, but I don't look at it as like, I don't technically look at it as a personality characteristic in that regard, but I do look at it as something that um it's like a whole combination of icky kind of emotions, but they're kind of
Mhm.
dull. They're not super intense for some, but it's more chronic in nature.
You
You
know the
know,
Harvey Danger song? You know the Harvey Danger song, the I'm not sick, but I'm not well.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good,
That's what
that's
I
it.
think of with this. Like
Yeah.
that's
Yep.
exactly what I think of with this,
Mhm,
where it is like that sense of blah. It's like
mhm.
you're not totally depressed, but you're also not at your peak, optimal level of functioning either.
Yeah. Well, just to use what Grant said, to your point, is what is it? The neglected middle child of mental health. He talks about
Yes.
the spectrum of depression on one end, despondent, drained, worthless, hopeless, all the other,
Mhm.
icky stuff that we're familiar with. Then flourishing, which not too many people are feeling that, but they call that the peak of well-being, or Rogers may call it like self-actualizing or something like
Yeah.
that. This is somewhere in the middle. You're not feeling great, but you're not way on the other side of the spectrum either.
Like basically, you get the stuff done that you need to get done, but you
Mhm.
don't necessarily have the level of joy or excitement that maybe you once had. And I know I've felt this a lot over the last couple of years. Obviously, until recently, I didn't have a name for it, but in some ways, I feel more empowered knowing there's a name and knowing it's not just like something that is this weird feeling that I'm experiencing that I can't explain.
Mhm.
And I think that's important. And it's important to, Lindsey, you and I've talked about this, like
Yes.
feel the feel, acknowledge the feeling, like
Yeah. Name it to
bring it
tame
out.
it.
Yeah,
Name it to tame it. Yes,
absolutely.
absolutely.
And to your point, Amber, too, not to sound too hokey, but it's kind of nice to know that we're not, you or me are not the only ones having these feelings, or you
Yeah,
know what I mean? Like, what's wrong with me?
absolutely.
This is weird. It's like, oh shoot,
Well,
many people are going through this at the same time.
absolutely. And then just thinking about when so many of us have been working from home, and that also really, really screws up our fundamental need for like whenever I think about routine, predictability, consistency, and having like a break in your schedule, or having that, just something that I feel like I really took for granted, for instance, is like that commute time.
Mhm.
Mm,
Because I feel like that commute time to and from work, or in between clients, in terms of going in between homes for in-home therapy, that allowed my brain to just sort of like filter out or process out whatever it needed for whatever that was, or to transition effectively from one
Mhm.
family to another, or from my work headspace to my home headspace. Um, and I do feel that even something that's small has actually had a pretty significant impact in terms of my functioning and needs of, creating more set boundaries, or setting appointments
Mhm.
in a certain kind of a way. Because it is very easy to just work all the time when you're at home. It's very
yes,
easy to
ma'am.
just find yourself constantly checking your emails, or doing follow-up things, or it's 10 o'clock at night, I think I'll follow up on this thing, or do
Yeah.
some admin work over here.
That's actually, it's interesting that you point that out. So prior to all the changes with the pandemic, I worked from an office, 45 minutes from my house. And I had a team of people that I worked alongside. When we all first came home, people were checking emails and sending emails at midnight, at 2 a.m., at 4 a.m., at 6 a.m. And finally, like management was like, hey, I need you folks to put your computer in a different room. If it is on your kitchen table, put it somewhere else, put it in a closet. You do not need to walk by this computer and just decide to send an email at 2 a.m. Like, this is not mentally healthy. This is not sustainable. Like, sleep, maybe, like, pay attention to your family, do something else, because yes, you're a valued employee and we would like for you to, shut it down at some point. And it was amazing to me that I was doing the same thing. I would take my computer into the kitchen with me cooking dinner. Like, I would take my work with me to areas and aspects of my life that I previously had really strong boundaries about. But because it was here and it was convenient, I was like, oh, what's the harm? It's no big deal. But that compounded over time. And I'm like, wait, these are 90-hour work weeks now. What's happening? Like,
Oh, I
it's
feel you
crazy.
100% on that
I
one.
know you do. Yeah.
I
And
think the
it's,
pandemic has kind of highlighted already pre-existing social cultural issues. So again, Amber, what you were saying, that stuff people were struggling with that even before the pandemic. Just
Yeah.
email, even a quote
yeah.
unquote regular job where you come home, and it just became a real cluster. When we started fully working from home, for a lot of us, it's learning that adjustment of balancing home life
Yes.
and work life. So we were already struggling that for decades. I think it's just now it's gotten really bad for some of
Somebody
us.
threw kerosene on it and like lit a
Yes,
match.
exactly. And now it's just
Yeah.
highlighting what we need as a society and individually, what we need to work on. I've seen it go the other way too. I've seen some people, even myself, when I used to work from home, is that sometimes I'm not as productive because I'm doing other things in the house. Like I'll do these chores, I'll do those things, I'll walk, and in some ways you like that, but other ways you're just not being efficient either. So you feel like
Mhm.
you're working more, but the quality of the efficiency of the work goes down too. At least you don't have a
I think
system in
that's
place.
fair, but I also think that ties into languishing, right?
Yes.
Because there's like that dull aspect of just like, let me just do what I need to get done and just keep on trucking. Like,
Mhm.
let me just kind of keep doing the things that I need to do, whether it's the bare minimum for the day or what have you.
Yeah.
Um, which is, it sort of brings my mind, at least, because I mean, I know I am notorious for doing things like this, just depending on how my work week has been. But then I find myself at the end of the day feeling really depleted of energy. Like I have, like maybe I've been working all day long, or I've been on back-to-back calls, or maybe just like maybe 3 sessions or something, which is like really intense or really draining for me
Yeah.
emotionally. So then I'm just sort of feeling like completely blah at the end of the day. So then I find myself at nighttime, where that's like I call it my me time or my catch up time, when in fact I've been home the entire day. So this is when I love that this article actually brought this up, because it's something that I definitely associate with ADHD as well, which is this idea of like the revenge bedtime procrastination,
Mm.
which is this idea of like staying up late at night to reclaim a sense of freedom or joy or whatever, all the things that you missed out on during your day. So that's whenever I kind of screw around and will look on my phone or post things online or kind of dabble and do things where I'm like staying up extra late at night
Yeah.
and then losing out on sleep that I need to help me be at optimal mental health the next day.
Mhm.
Go
Yeah,
ahead,
I
Adam.
mean, sure.
Mhm.
So this is an interesting one. My opinion, this could be like a whole separate kind of conversation. The when Grant, like another podcast, for example, but Grant, brings this up here. I think he says, like, he talks about the way this, I guess it's a Chinese expression, how maybe initially, and it's been brought up, maybe it's retaliation against loss of control, but Grant argues that maybe it's a quiet defiance against languishing.
Mhm.
So again, I think of myself. I think I became guilty of this having my child about 5 years ago. He'll be 5 this Saturday, where I had a busy, long, stressful day. My wife and I, it's all the kiddo. He goes to bed really late, and then maybe we get an hour or two in together. Once he goes to sleep and before we can go to sleep, and we just try to get as much as we can done, like
Yeah.
quality time.
Right.
But I think a lot of people now have seen this during the pandemic too, is because I think, again, I'm trying to think about his language, but some level of bliss or some momentary quality goodness of a day, in a day that was languishing, to at least salvage a portion of the day. And I think that's true. I've seen myself personally just fighting it. Like, I know I should go to sleep by 12, but
Yeah.
it's like, I'm kind of having fun watching this, or I'm
Exactly.
so excited
that
revising a
idea.
to-do list. Yay. It's just anything. I
It's
feel like
that
I'm being,
idea of control, though. Like, you get to decide that you're going to go to bed later so that you can watch the show you want to watch, versus like all day long. Oftentimes we're at the mercy of someone else scheduling us, or someone else needs us to do something, or like, thinking of me as a mom, like my kids hit the ground running at about 6:30, and it's breakfast, it's change clothes, it's wash dishes, it's, figure out the
Oh, you're
day.
on.
So yeah, you are on. And then when they go to bed, it's like, oh, I'm my own person again. So
bonus
like, I can
time.
have some satisfaction of just doing things for
Totally.
me. Like, I get it. And then it's a like vicious cycle of, I didn't get any sleep, so now I don't have energy to do the things, but I'm not going to go to bed early because I still want to have the time where I'm in control of what I get to do. And it's like, day after day, you're just sabotaging your own energy levels, and you're sabotaging your own productivity, because I don't know if this is like an ADD thing or a type A thing, but if I can't get to the end of a day with like knowing that I achieved certain things, like if I have my to-do list and I didn't get to mark off any of them, but I was quote unquote busy all day, I feel like I've done nothing. And that's a super struggle for me. So then I find myself at the end of the day trying to squeeze in the things that are going to make me feel like I've achieved something, or going to make me feel like I put my time to some sort of good use, which also aids in the languishing, because if I don't feel that joy of accomplishment or that joy of having done something, then I just feel like blah. And, what did
Oh,
I
I
spend
want
my
to.
time doing? Go ahead, Lindsay.
I feel like there's so much to say about what you just mentioned, because automatically my brain is going straight to, we're talking about languishing in the context of like even your work life, in terms
Yeah.
of being burnout, working all the time, constantly on call, and all the things. But when Adam was talking about just the idea of the cultural norms behind
Mm,
our work life and the
yes.
absence of a work life balance, so to speak. I think a part of this, which is a larger conversation as well, is just the fact that in the United States, culturally, there's a huge component here that equates productivity with self worth.
Hmm.
And so it's like that's a huge piece too. It's like we see that we're not getting that thing done. And so you might be feeling blah after. Well, I
Yeah.
mean, I think that there is a little bit of a thing going on there where, society kind of has conditioned us to have some beliefs around how much we should be doing, how productive we should be doing in an effort to feel like we've met our quota, or have, are worthy enough for whatever that is.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
I personally don't do the to-do list thing in the way that you do. I think we've kind of laughed about our differences in that way. But I can definitely relate to reclaiming my freedom at nighttime and completely
Yeah.
sabotaging my sleep patterns.
It's tough, and it's absolutely like society's impact on us as people and humans, that even the idea that we are supposed to feel so much joy in a day, and if we're not feeling that level of joy, then we're languishing. Like when this topic came up, I'm like, but maybe it's not about being like level 10 joyful every single day. That's unrealistic. That's an expectation that I personally don't think can be met. But then does that automatically mean you're languishing if you're not on level 10? Like, where do we draw the line? And I think I'm interested to see what y'all say from your perspective, because I automatically want to rail against it and say, well, I'm not languishing, like I'm living. But I also know that I'm not living, if you know what I mean. Like there's a difference.
Well, I think that goes back to the chronicity part of it. Nobody's going to have all tens or anything. You know, some people could claim to do, but the point is the average person isn't going to have many tens or many ones and zeros. I think it's more of the, I'm getting a whole bunch of 3, 4s and 5s, not just for one day or a week, but many months and now a couple of years. That's how I kind of look at that piece. And maybe on the average, I'm just making this up, maybe my average is usually a 7-ish each year, whatever, you know what I mean? But now it's like a 4 or a 5. And so I'm not icky enough to say I need to, you know, really serious professional help, but I know something just doesn't feel right. Like I feel not productive. I'm not connected. I feel off. Yeah. I'm not myself. I'll let people say that I'm off my baseline.
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious. Adam, do you mind kind of touching on at least, like, what do you think the difference is between like dysthymia and languishing?
Well, I don't know. It's I would say that
maybe first
when I hear the word if I hear dysthymia, I'm thinking like persistent depressive disorder, like a depression kind of personality.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I would look at that as it's still chronic, but instead of having a variety of like, again, sticking with the scale 4, 5s, and 6s, that person's kind of having more 2s, 3s, and 4s. Do you know what I mean? Like it's a chronic component, but they're at a much lower baseline than the average.
Which actually might go to what you were saying earlier today about how research has suggested that people who do experience languishing over a period of time are more inclined to end up with those conditions later, or end up with a clinical condition later on.
Right, because Grant says, which is, you know, we don't have the data like that, but he says perhaps there's more people that are languishing than there are people with major depressive disorder, which could be true. But at the same time, languishing can be a risk factor for later on developing depression or generalized anxiety disorder, or for some people, even PTSD. So, because if you're in the middle, you could go either way. You get a little bit better, or you could start going the other way. And now I may need professional help.
Absolutely. And I think that's a good kind of segue, because we wanted to also cover and provide some tips and conversations around what to do to kind of break that languishing cycle, or things that you can do to bring that into your control of taking a step in the direction, you know, whether it's finding someone to talk to, you know, what that looks like.
So what is the antidote to
what's the antidote?
Languishing?
Exactly that.
Yeah.
Fix it.
Well,
flow. The answer is flow. Go with the flow.
Well, yeah. Well, I can start off. I can make a couple of things that Grant says, and then there was a couple elements that he suggests that is very similar to how one treats depression in some ways. But you know, he uses the word flow.
I thought so too, by the way.
Yeah.
Like that sounds like same kind of.
You know, and I think I remember too, Lindsey, we were talking too about like mindfulness or two, and he argues that, you know, I'm going to use a quote here from, just so I don't get it wrong, for flow: elusive state of absorption in a meaningful challenge or momentary bond. I think that's a huge key element of a definition of flow, where your sense of time, place, and self melts away. I think all of us, I used to hear that when I was younger in sports, like the flow, all that kind of stuff, but you could be doing almost anything where you feel really engaged into a task. But I think the key element there too is you're having some level of challenge like a self-challenge where you're getting accomplishment. Because I can argue mindfulness is very effective for a lot of my clients, but this is different than mindfulness, because mindfulness, being present oriented, having maybe even some level of acceptance. Here is like almost saying, get a task that you can really feel connected to and really enjoy that process and have a sense of challenge.
Yes. I just want to repeat that one more time, what you said, just so we can kind of like hold space for that quote. I think that was really well said. So the definition of flow is, at least by Grant, an elusive state of absorption in a meaningful challenge or a momentary bond where your sense of time, place, and self melts away. So I love that, because it's essentially saying, like, whenever we think maybe the opposite is resting, it's essentially kind of promoting a sense of like active rest.
Correct.
So like really in like engaging your brain, in the sense where there's something cognitively demanding of it, and it's making you think, maybe getting you energized in some way, but it's a sense of active rest, not just like going to sleep.
So as y'all were saying that, the picture that it created in my head is getting so lost in a project that the world no longer matters, right?
Correct.
Bingo.
I remember I've watched Eric get lost in art projects, and he would go like 14 hours working on the same project and never move from his seat. Like time didn't exist. Hunger didn't exist.
That
and
is
he
a
would
high
walk
level
away.
of hyperfixation. Yes.
Yes, very high level. But like he would walk away from those art projects and be jazzed. Like he was not coming out of that in a stupor of exhaustion. He was coming out of that like pumped to live life. And I like, it's mind boggling to me, but that's exactly what I think Grant is trying to get across. Like it's something that sparks joy, something that challenges your brain, but also makes like normal daily tasks non-existent and like no longer relative to your person. And I think that's the key.
Right. It kind of induces, to your point, it induces like a meditative state in a way, like there's a meditative quality, for instance, like when you get into your writing, your art, your running, whatever it is, it kind of induces like this meditative state of like, you just get so into it, and you do lose track of like feelings or distractions or anxieties or just worry in general.
It stops the record that's constantly playing in your head, right? Like it's a good break.
Lindsay shared a little bit of her notes that we were talking earlier too about, I work on this a lot with my clients, but rumination is focusing so much on the past, the icky things, and worry, anxiety is future oriented. And by getting this flow, you're not doing either one of those, because people, whether they have mental health illness or not, flourishing, whatever you want to call it, is they're stuck either in the past or the future, but not the present.
Right.
There's a big but to all this, by the way. What Grant said is that the but is for the flow. It's hard to do that in general, and especially during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And so he kind of argues that, to be fair, to most of us, we're actually pretty good at doing this. A lot of us, more than we realize. But the pandemic has happened, so it's made it harder to achieve this. And so he talks about, again, how to get uninterrupted time into your schedule, focusing on small goals. This is the stuff when I was reading, it was like, oh, this sounds like some things we do at CBT. You even use the word activated, Lindsay. This is what we often call behavioral activation.
Behavioral activation.
Yes. Go back to start doing the things that you really enjoy, schedule it in, plan it out, and eventually can come back to be more of a natural process for you. Kind of like a jump start to some ways.
I definitely agree. And honestly, I'm thinking about all of the quirky things that I have heard friends, family, clients alike all talk about, like these newfound hobbies during the pandemic. Like,
yes.
Oh, I suddenly got into bird watching. Oh, I learned how to play guitar.
Yes.
Just all of these random things that people had never tried. I believe like these things were kind of like the fight against languishing kind of played out.
Yes, absolutely.
Do you remember like even at the beginning of the pandemic, all these people were trying to make the perfect sourdough bread?
Yes.
And like all that stuff was like at the beginning of the pandemic. It's like people and also, of course, the stores were like wiped out of like flour and all these basic things. But I do believe that we have been trying our best to stay occupied and do all the things. But I do think there's a piece of that languishing component when you talk about, how long is this happening? How long is this you kind of get bored after a while. Your mind kind of gets that stagnant space of like, well, I don't feel like making any more sourdough bread.
Now
What's
you
the
got to
next
make
thing?
cupcakes. You got to, yeah, you got to
Yes.
go on to something else.
Exactly. So you got to
No,
keep
there's
yourself.
definitely a lot of positive that, that comes out of what we're talking about here in the pandemic too, even though it's hard to hear that, is people have rekindled like relationships or old
Mhm.
things they didn't use, or they found new tasks. So
Mhm.
is also a testament to us too of how resilient we are in a lot of ways too. And I could even argue too that maybe languishing is not ideal, but languishing is better than being clinically depressed. There's no shame in being depressed, but maybe all those things that, like those examples you gave, Lindsey, is what people were doing to at least keep themselves up at middle baseline, at least so they're not down there, you know.
Absolutely. Think about all the people that started making masks for volunteers.
Yes.
Remember when, masks were unavailable for a lot of hospital workers? There were a lot of volunteers that said, "Hey, I'll make some." Um, which does bring in sort of what I'm not sure if this was specified in terms of like identified as like the three M's, but in terms of the flow aspect of it involving mindfulness, mastery, and mattering. So becoming absorbed in whatever that activity is and being very mindful in the moment in the here and now, and then developing a form of mastery around whatever that thing is. And so that really ties into even what we talk about in the psych world, this idea of self-efficacy,
Mhm.
and really kind of building up our belief in our sense of self and what we're able to do. So developing a sense of mastery is always good for our sense of self. And then the mattering is, do something that makes you feel like you matter or can make a difference.
Mhm. I'd say that the first two you mentioned is almost a guaranteed for what we're talking about. I think the mattering is kind of like a bonus for some people.
Mm.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? But
Sure.
that's an excellent point. Is that if you can add that extra layer of, maybe for me just playing a guitar and that's enough, and I'm okay with that. Or for other people, with your mask example, that's that next layer I think of also mattering too. Like I'm in the flow, I'm doing this, but I'm also contributing somehow to helping others as well. Yeah, but you mentioned self-efficacy. That's a huge element. Um, People that feel like they're productive, good at doing particular tasks, and have value that come from it, it's a good protective factor for, again, getting depressed or anything like that, because you feel like you're valued both for yourself and the people that are around you as well.
Yeah, so I'd like to kind of tie this into what we had mentioned at the beginning with regard to toxic positivity and the resiliency factor there. Would you like to say anything about how that plays into languishing, or how that might, um, I don't know, exacerbate symptoms perhaps?
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, well, so Grant is, we liked it because Grant mentioned it towards the end there, is
Yeah.
writing, which I didn't see that coming when I was reading the article. I liked it though. But basically he said like a common thing that all of us in the mental health field kind of say is that, generally speaking, physical health challenges, typically, there's always exceptions, are typically not stigmatized as much as mental health. So there's been a lot of progress made for sure over the last decade, especially the last couple of years with the pandemic, in destigmatizing mental health.
Mhm.
I love this one quote he had in there, says like, not depressed does not mean you're not struggling. It was a really good example. And for what he was getting at, instead of like, when someone says, I always joke about this, like when someone, how are you? How are you doing? How are you feeling? We always say good or great. It's like, well, if we're
Fine.
not going to be honest, why would we even answer that? So he's like, maybe we should say languishing, right? To avoid
I
that
feel like
toxic
shit. Thank you.
shit. Yes,
Yeah.
it's a good way to put it.
Been a
But
hard day.
Thank you for
I don't.
asking.
I think to your point, Lindsey, is that when you dismiss these kind of negative emotions, and you kind of respond to distress with like false reassurance, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like everything's going to be all right. People say, well, that's optimism. Well, if you mean it, but if you're just saying it for the sake of it and you're not acknowledging that either you or myself is feeling crummy or shitty, it's not validating. You're not being empathic to others or yourself. And ultimately that just leads to more mental health distress. Think about it.
Yes.
I know we're
Yeah.
joking a little bit, Lindsey, but imagine if you could do that and say, someone, how you doing? Shitty. And you laugh a little bit, and then your colleague says, oh, you want to talk about it over lunch? Or
Mhm.
just even saying, I'm sorry you feel that way. I hope you feel better. That could just,
Absolutely.
those little things add up over time.
It adds up because you're no longer lying to yourself and everyone else, because saying fine when you're not fine, oftentimes we do it because one, we don't trust whoever we're talking to with the information.
That's a good point.
Back to the trust
Or
issues.
back to the trust issues. Or two, we just don't feel like there's time to discuss it.
True.
And that goes into the transition part of our days, because we've packed our days so full and we're maximizing every moment and every hour and every whatever, that we don't have time to acknowledge the fact that we have feelings and that we're human. So we're just going to try to ignore it and like hope that it goes away, because that's how that works.
No, it's a great point. I mean, I got colleagues that are psychologists next door. How you doing, Adam? I'm okay.
I thought you were about to draw some names.
And I'm thinking, like, I don't even want, like you said, trust. Not even I trust them, but it's like, do I really want to throw that on them? Like, how much? Like, I don't want that. I know they're busy. They're not going to sit down and spend 15 minutes talking about my kid having a tantrum this morning. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So
Yeah.
it is that interesting balance between, it's not always necessarily a facade, but also finding the right timing as well. Both to your point, Amber, trusting the person, but also feeling like, is this the appropriate time to talk about how we're feeling too?
Well, and that also ties in expectations, right? Because your expectation, if you tell me, you know, you had a rough morning with your kid, the expectation shouldn't be that we have a 40-minute discussion about it, but we can just acknowledge, dang, that sucks. Like, that makes for a really hard morning. I feel you. Like, I'm
Right.
sorry that that's how your day started. Either offering the opportunity to talk about it or just moving on to the next thing, because there's power in calling it out and identifying it. What did you say, Lindsay? Name it to tame it?
Name it to tame it. Yeah.
If we continue to just walk through life and pretend that we're all fine, it's fine, everything's fine, like nothing's fine. We're struggling.
What I think that goes to the stigma piece, those are all excellent points, and I've in different contexts have talked about this with clients or colleagues or friends, is there's also, again, going back to stigma, there's concern that if I'm the one that's complaining about the tantrum child or stressed out, am I going to be the person that has like, oh, what's wrong with this guy over here? Because every time we ask how he's doing, instead of saying great, sometimes he's kind of honest, and they're not being honest with themselves. Right.
Maybe I'll stop asking Adam.
Yeah, let's not. Yeah,
I'll
exactly.
skip over him.
Just ignore my office door because he's always going to have something to say to you.
There's always a crisis unfolding.
Yeah.
We'll just dodge that person.
You know, and I think that's going to be important culturally to kind of take down some of those barriers with the stigma, that just because there's someone that is struggling emotionally or languishing, that's okay, and not look at them differently just because they're perhaps more courageous or more open to share how they feel instead of stigmatizing them.
Lovely reframe. I like that.
Yeah, I really liked that. That was good. You get a round of applause for that one.
Yay.
It's a good one. Yay. But
Yay.
it's true. So I think also I would love if you can comment a little bit. So yes, we're talking about like toxic positivity here, but also there is such thing called positive psychology, which research has suggested that it can actually be quite helpful. So I wonder if you can comment a little bit on that, Dr. V. While I understand that you are a CBT person, positive psychology is still a thing.
Well, it's funny you say that, because I think positive psychology can be a challenging balance with what we're talking about here.
I agree.
Because some people argue if you use too much, whatever definition one wants to use for positive psychology, it can come off as toxic positivity.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, you know, it's the whole idea of positive psychology. It depends. People have different views of this, but, you know, what makes life worth living, kind of focusing more on the individual, societal, kind of positive, subjective experiences that we have. So like when I look at it as a CBT guy, is when someone comes in with mental health issues, to not always focus on, look at all their problems and all their weaknesses and the diagnosis, the symptoms. A good mindset is also look at their strengths. How do I integrate that into therapy? Or if we're not talking about therapy, one's everyday life. You know, what are the other elements? Do they have some hope? That's where a lot of it came from as well. With Martin Seligman was looking at learned optimism, hopefulness, all that kind of stuff. That was very important. Those are important ingredients to, if someone has that from a mental health standpoint or in therapy, their prognosis is going to be much better if they're hopeful for the future and having that optimism. So it's a great question, but I think it's these days a delicate balance between how much of that. It's like anyone that says like, oh, you know, so this person's an optimist. I call myself a realist, but they call me a pessimist. It's like, it's all going back on that spectrum component. But I think it goes back to is how honest you're being with yourself and the others and how you feel.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
When the honesty portion of it is the most important and also the scariest for
Mhm.
exactly what you mentioned. You know, are people going to start avoiding me because I actually tell the truth? Which, if that's the case, my feedback to that would be those aren't your people. So that's okay. If they decided to start avoiding you, that's like nature taking its course. But I do think we have to be those vulnerable people and we have to start opening those doors. It doesn't have to be with, you know, the entire world, but try
Right. I mean,
being like, try being real with your people that you call friends or the people that you spend time with. If I call Lindsay and I'm like, hey, how are you? And she says, fine, I can hear in her voice that she's not. Like, don't lie to me. Don't, that's not,
we're gonna have
it's
issues.
not gonna work.
Well,
Now,
we can
Lindsay
talk
would
about
never
how
do
this
that.
applies to couples therapy. How's the life go? How's it going? It's fine, honey. It's like,
Everything's
whoa,
great.
is it really fine? Amber, to your point too, I think it's important to kind of, especially if people are trying this out for the first time, like
Yeah.
this, you know, stick with those that are closest or, you know, they trust the most, the close family, the close friends. You know, I still think it's important at work to have like a social filter to some
Yes.
degree.
Yeah.
But
Of course.
to your
Yeah.
the closest people, we should be able to be the most vulnerable with. If we don't feel, if I can't feel that close with my wife, for example, or some of my best friends,
Mhm.
I think that says something about me and or the relationships that we're in.
And I
Yes.
think that's what it's going to take to actually make the change to society, to kind of break down some of those barriers and break down some of those norms that tell us we have to be okay all the time, because that's not real life. And if we present the facade that we are okay all the time, then that's just going to lead to languishing, which could potentially, to both of your point, eventually lead to depression and
Mhm.
other struggles. So start at home, start breaking it, and just get comfortable knowing and calling out your emotions, because like, you're a human and it's part of the human experience. We're not robots, man.
No, we're not.
We have
but-
feels.
Lindsay, it's
Lots of
CBT,
feels.
it's gradual exposure. You start with small
Yeah.
steps first, and then we expand it to bigger steps where we start taking more chances as we gain more confidence.
You know, this definitely just had my brain go totally
Uh-oh.
like add-on direction here. Not that we have time to. Oh gosh, are you shaking your head at me, Adam?
No, I nodded. This is a shake. This was just going.
Oh, okay. I was expecting your hand to go on your forehead, like, oh my gosh, what has she
Where's
come
she
up
taking
with
us? Hey,
now?
I'm buckling up. Let's go.
Oh, there we go. There, now we have it. No, actually, as you were talking, Amber, I immediately kind of thought of like, oh man, I would love to have you come back on, Adam, for another episode to really kind of dive in around like toxic masculinity.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, you really did kind of go from one. Well, the word sounds
Man, you
similar.
made a big jump in
Yeah,
that
I did.
one.
Yeah, but it has the word toxic in it, so that
Well,
means it does-
yes, but you know, whenever you're sitting there
What
talking
if,
about
what
emotions
if I
and stuff,
said I think that's a great idea, and I also maybe can counter that a little bit, where I think toxic masculinity is overused sometimes, and I think some of the stuff
Yes.
that I find prideful in
nowadays, I would,
being masculine, I find sometimes ashamed, and I don't like that. And so, yeah, we can definitely have. I think the
I
pendulum, is, in
love
my
the
opinion,
idea of-
it's swung too far in the other direction. I think it's a valid point. It came from a good place, and now it's kind of gone a little, in my opinion, and others,
Hey,
it's
let's
kind of
dive
gone
in.
the other direction.
I
Yeah,
would love
well-
to have you come back and talk about that for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that's important.
But I hope y'all saw how I got to that, right?
I
You were
did,
talking
yes.
ab-
Relationships, sharing feelings, men not being able to share feelings. I got it. I followed your train.
Thanks for picking up what I was putting down. It
I'm
made
a strong
sense.
man. I don't cry. I'm not a strong man.
Oh boy. Adam, I'll be muting your line now. No, I think this was an awesome discussion. I know, per usual, we went down a bunch of rabbit holes and covered a lot of different ideas, but
I thought we stayed on track pretty darn well today.
I mean,
You did it for you, Lindsay. You did a good job.
I thought
Yeah,
I
you're
thought I
doing a
held
great
myself
job,
together.
friend.
Mhm.
I love it. I do look forward to the follow-up episode on toxic masculinity and that pendulum swing. But I'm curious, Lindsay, did you want to share anything else with the audience or anything that you wanted to make sure that we gave today, or any last
No.
comments?
No,
Okay.
nothing in particular. I just would invite our audience to please remember to follow us on social media. And remember that we do have a YouTube channel. So we do ask that you subscribe to What the Fox podcast on YouTube. That would be fantastic.
Then you get all of the side benefits of seeing our awkward facial expressions and all of the hand gestures, because some of us
And
talk with our
Adam
hands.
putting his head in his bare hands, shaking his head
Mm.
that you can't see.
Absolutely. Well, Adam, thank you so much for joining us today. I really enjoyed this conversation and I look forward to the follow-up.
Thanks again. It was a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
Bye,
All
y'all.
right,
See you
we'll
next
see you
Tuesday.
next Tuesday.
And we all sing, everything is gonna be just fine. It's gonna fall into place. The sun is gonna set on your terrible day.